ever introduced me? Maybe. That's kind of incredible. Thank you all very much for being here. In a moment, we're going to turn the lights way down. I'm the least interesting thing to watch tonight. I was invited here in the context of Sukkot and themes that resonate with Sukkot. Maybe, this is okay, okay. In terms of offering safe harbor to those in needs, the outsider, giving a welcoming, a warm welcome to strangers. So that's kind of the themes that I was thinking about in preparing my talk with you tonight. I believe that artists should be short but sweet. So I'm going to present maybe, I didn't count, but maybe 5 or 6 projects quickly out of maybe 30, 35 that I've realized. And without further ado, I will begin. This was one of my early projects after art school, which, by the way, was here in San Francisco. I got my MFA at San Francisco State, and immediately thereafter, I moved to Berlin. Some of you may know this project already. What you're looking at is a color photograph of a building in one of Berlin's, in this case, East Berlin's, former Jewish quarters, with a black and white projection of a Hebrew bookstore that was located exactly there in 1930, right onto the building facade. So it's not Photoshop, it's not collage, it's not montage. Literally, if you're walking down the street, you see this projection on the building, you turn your head to the left, you see me waving at you from across the street with my generator and my projectors and my camera equipment. So this Hebrew bookstore was located exactly at this location in 1930. Now, I originally come from photography, so I put a lot of energy into creating art photographs from many of my installations. So if you see this piece in a gallery or a museum, you say it's photography. If you're on site for the installation, you say, oh, this is public art, this is a public project, this is site-specific installation, etc. Those kinds of concerns are less interesting to me. What's most important, because I believe that ideas can live in different forms, so what's most important is that they do so effectively in each form. So meaning like that it be a good photograph or that it be a good installation. Slide projection of former Hebrew bookstore. Slide projection of police raid on former Jewish residents. The titles are very deadpan. I just give the address, like what was this, Linienstrasse 137, slide projection of police raid on former Jewish residents. This was the neighborhood of the Ostjuden, the Russian and Polish Jewish immigrants to Berlin. This was not a German Jewish neighborhood. It was a immigrant Jewish neighborhood. And this was not a Nazi police raid. This was their form of like ISIS, like immigration raid. This was from 1920. I did not use any black and white photographs deliberately. I cut it off at 1932, right before National Socialism. Because we don't need to, a lot of times in art, it's what you don't say. And we don't need to be told what happened later. We know that. Slide projection of former Jewish resident. Sorry. Slide projection of former Jewish resident. Mulachstrasse 37, slide projection of former Jewish residents. These were children. Again, remember, this was East Berlin. This was 1992, not that long after the wall came down. In those early years after German reunification, this neighborhood was yet to be gentrified. It doesn't look anything like this today. If you've been to Berlin and you've been to Berlin Mitte, that's where this was, but this was before all the gentrification happened. And the graffiti there, was der Krieg verschonte, überlebt im Sozialismus nicht. that second half of the sentence is on another one of my pieces, means what the war spared did not survive socialism. So it's anti-DDR, anti-East German graffiti that was put up after the wall came down. So there's many, many layers of German history here. There's my projection of Jewish residents from before the war. There's the history of the DDR, the East German government, the socialist government, with this sort of Orwellian TV tower. That's Berlin Alexanderplatz in the background. Basically a spy center. And then this anti-DDR graffiti that was put up after German reunification. Slide projection, excuse me, very sensitive today. Slide projection of former religious book salesmen. And that's a pre-war building on the right. They were often in states of disrepair in this neighborhood because the East German government did not have a lot of money to renovate as they did in the West. And then on the east is like a socialist public housing project building with a public furnace in between the two. Slide projection of former Jewish hat shop with resident. Slide projection of, so Gipsstrasse 2, slide projection of former Jewish cafe with patrons. And that light flare is not from my projector, that's from a street light. I saw it and I liked it, so I let it be there. I put a lot of energy into and consideration into crafting and choreographing these photographs, which framed the relationship of these black and white projections from the past, interacting with the colored present, architecture of the present. Slide projection of former Jewish resident. Sorry, that was also, and sometimes they're straight-edged and sometimes they're kind of rough-edged. Sometimes I was trying to create this feeling of that the past was burning through the facades of today. And this is pre-Photoshop, so, I was out there with, it was very DIY, the whole thing. I was out there with my slide paint, I don't even think these things exist anymore, like Kodak slide paint. I put on the black paint on the slide, put it in, look at it, nope, don't like it, pull it out, wipe it off, start over again. Or I would use slide tape. Because these are just portions of photographs, right? They're not the entire photographs. Usually less was more, but I sometimes did do up to 4 projections. This one has 3. This was the location of Berlin's this neighborhood's former silent movie houses, Biograph Theater. So that was kind of my first project after art school. It was essentially guerrilla art. It was, just me. Maybe sometimes I had somebody being my bodyguard or helping me. But basically it was me. I had my 4 used Kodak slide projectors, a generator, and like a 1964 Ford Granada. And I was ready to roll, basically. I also had to figure out how to disable the street lights in East Berlin. But that's more for Q&A afterwards. If you have questions, I can go a little deeper into it. But it is kind of fun. But that was, I mentioned that was guerrilla art because what I'm about to show you is the opposite. So I began getting these invitations, commissions, to create these large produced projects. And what I mean by that, by produced, meaning I'm given a budget, there's a long time frame, the press is notified. It's like a big production. So I was invited to come to Denmark, to Copenhagen, to create an artwork that would, it was sort of really up to my choice, but it ended up being the artwork that commemorated the 50-year anniversary since the liberation of Denmark from Nazi occupation. Now, I interpreted that in my own way. It was 9 underwater light boxes. You're looking at sort of an installation shot. The Danish Parliament building is immediately to the left, And this is one of the central canals of Copenhagen. So there were these 9 very large faces about, oh, there's a jellyfish. Very large faces about 1 meter below the surface of the water. And as mentioned, the piece was called Portraits of Exile. So half of the portraits were of Danish Jews rescued to Sweden in 1943 in that sort of heroic, larger-than-life, epic and often mythologized rescue where 10,000 Danish Jews were secretly taken to Sweden over 10 evenings by Danish fishermen just before they were to have been deported to Nazi death camps. And that was about 95% of the Danish Jewish community was saved. So larger than life, sort of mind-boggling when you think about what could have happened instead. The other light boxes, the other portraits were of present-day present-day refugees. When I say present-day, I mean at the time I did this project, like mid-1990s, living in Denmark, who were met with a much more ambivalent welcome and helping hand. This is a woman from the former Yugoslavia with a Danish entry stamp on her passport limiting her residence permission in Denmark. Now we're going back to historical. This is a Danish Jew rescued to Sweden with a Juda star. And for me, it was 2 human rights stories. One historical, which was heroic, larger than life, epic. The other present day, quite ambivalent, wanting in some way in its response. And the situation in Denmark is much, much worse today than when I did this project. Denmark has, there's a lot of xenophobia in Denmark. This is what they look like in the daytime. And so the Parliament building is just to the right. And what's kind of fun, I did this project in 1995, but, the whole city saw it. It was there for, I forget if it was 4 weeks or 8 weeks. And sometimes I run into Danes and we talk about it, and if they were in Copenhagen, they remember the piece, which is kind of fun. Okay, moving on. Moving right along. I figured that some of you might be from the East Coast or have family from the East Coast, and or in any case, perhaps your families came through the Lower East Side at some point. So I'm just showing, yes. Stay on the mic. Thank you, big sister. 1 minute older. Never lets me forget. No, I think they want me to keep my mask on. So I'm going to just show you a 2 or 3 minute clip from the BBC, which says it.
In some ways, most wonderfully, when it gets to the synagogue.
Oh, I didn't do my little switcheroo. Sorry. Yeah, we kept having technical problems with that particular film. Give me 1 second. I will try to do this seamlessly. And we come back.
In some wonderfully, when it gets to the synagogue.
Hold on.
Shimon Attie is preparing to make his mark on. Over the last 4 months, he's talked to residents about their memories of the neighborhood, as well as their own stories, superstitions, and dreams. He spent more than 2 years planning a laser art installation that will take place here in the heart of the Lower East Side, an area influenced by generations of Jewish, Hispanic, and Chinese immigrants.
I very much respond to spaces and to places, and by temperament, I'm very interested in memory. And how do we give visual form to something so, on one hand, so intangible and ethereal, but on the other hand, something very real for us.
Shimon found his answer with lasers. Words made of light scroll across the architecture in real time, moving from building to building. Fragments of thoughts, poems, songs are all made visible on the street, some in English, others in Yiddish, Mandarin, or Spanish, the languages of this community. It's a major art project that required a lot of coordination and backing.
We couldn't imagine a better marriage for public art as really stunning the public.
That's
with
Ann
great visuals
Pasternak, the director of the
and
Brooklyn
providing them
Museum
with
today.
content that was incredibly thoughtful and appealing.
She was my producer.
Shimon says that the lasers help animate his project.
The quality of laser light mirrors how memory itself functions. Lasers, they're very intense light, very focused, so they appear to have a presence. And yet, after all, it's just a light source. It's much more like a ghostly kind of writing, as if a ghost is writing out of thin air. That's the visual effect that I wanted.
This is high-tech public art at its most public. Anybody, it seems, who walks through this neighborhood and sees this art installation ends up staying. What do you get
Some
from
of the
it?
things, are very touching. Like someone saying that they live so poorly in a tenement, and the conditions were so bad. And I know that these people come. This population has grown up in this area and have come from bad times.
And this is really a wonderful change, the fact that you could display something in art in a very simple form and in a very easy form, I think, and people could see it in a very clear and in a very beautiful manner. I think it's wonderful.
I think it's going to cause a lot of the people that live in the community to just look differently at the buildings that they live in.
For 2 centuries, this part of Manhattan has been home to many different groups of immigrants. But that's changing as affluent young professionals move in. But Shimon Attie hopes his laser art will help keep the older memories alive. Damien Fowler, BBC News, New York.
Great. Let me just, I want to, before I forget, I've got to change there we go. Thank you for bearing with me. And that BBC piece was good in terms of showing the overall, like the the animated write-out technique that we developed. But it's less good at showing sort of the dramatic visual breadth of the project. It was 2 city blocks in Manhattan. I remember when we lived in a tenement in the top floor in very bad condition. It was like a dream, ... This was an English translation from a Chinese poem. I don't remember all the words now. I used to know them all by heart. I've been wandering, now I remember. I've been wandering so long, changing places as one would change clothes. I'm leaving now, but I remember my past as closely as tightly sewn stitches. This is just a part of the poem, right, that you're seeing right now. And I made photographs, again, of the installations with the intention and hope that the photographs could live on their own. The history of another. I come from a tradition in photography that is sometimes referred to as made in order to be photographed. Meaning you perform an action, you create an installation, you do a gesture for the camera. And the resulting photographic image is at least a significant part of the art, that they're kind of inseparable. And I've always married different media together in my work. So this is from my Rome project when I was at the American Academy in Rome. Again, for all the projects I'm showing you, I'm thinking about Sukkot. That's my guiding light for tonight. In terms of the other, this is called The History of Another. And these were projections that I created in Rome. The projected individuals is like this person and this kind of young man or older boy on the right side of the frame. These are Roman Jews that were photographed near these sites between about 1880 and 1920. And this was not in reference to the Second World War. I was actually kind of trying to pivot backwards in time, looking at the long history of the Judeo-Christian culture and also the grand history of the West, and trying to raise questions as to who's on the inside looking in and, excuse me, I said that wrong. Who's on the inside looking out and who's on the outside looking in? So these are Jews, but they are intended to also be a bit more generic as others, as the other. And I was using ancient, kind of the glories and ruins of ancient Rome as a backdrop, as well as some contemporary structures in Rome. And these were made specifically in order to be photographed. They were not for a public audience. The Berlin project that I showed you was kind of 50-50, and if you ask me later in Q&A if you want to know how residents responded to seeing those ghostly projections of former Jewish residents on their buildings, you can you can certainly ask me. It's quite a bit. A lot of people don't know that Rome has a pyramid in the eastern part of the city that was built, I forget which century, by a Roman politician. And here's my intervention, this fellow in the doorway, peeping out. And again, the titles are very deadpan. At Portico of Octavia, at Pyramida, at Pyramid, under Castle of St. Angelo, that's sort of the perennial man under the bridge narrative. At Temple of Fortuna, I had to get very special permission, to do these. Not all of them, but many of them, especially ones such as this that were done in excavation sites. So it was a bureaucratic, Italy, so it wasn't easy, let's put it that way. But those of you who know Rome know how Rome is a little bit like South Beach, right? The way they aestheticize their sites with these really lush color gels and whatnot. And at first I found that to be very problematic and off-putting. And then eventually I kind of came to the realization of let Rome be Rome and work with it. These are three Jewish architects, actually. But this project is more spacious. It is more literary. It was never intended to have that kind of really tight meat and potatoes site specificity of the Berlin project, which was really referencing a community that disappeared a few years after those photographs were taken. I had a different sensibility with this project. This is the Colosseum, the backside. This is simply called Behind the Colosseum. And I think many of these projects are on view at Catherine Clark's gallery. The Crossing, a fairly recent piece of mine. Let me just get it going. Okay, give me 1 second. I made this piece in Europe with 7 Syrian refugees who had recently crossed the Mediterranean on rafts. And they were lucky. They made it. They did not drown. They were not disappeared in Syria before they had a chance to flee. And I was invited by a European government to make a project and of my choice, and this is what I created. But that particular nation was one of those European microstates that has a history of the casino industry, and where some James Bond films were filmed. So that was kind of in my artistic imagination. And by the way, there are no digital effects. And the 7 Syrian refugees in this piece had no performance experience whatsoever. We trained them. And I said to them, I have this crazy idea. Like, I wonder, does the game of casino roulette in some way speak to the experience of being a refugee in the sense of the forces of life and death that are outside of our control? That are outside of everyone's control, but even more so for them, right? And I was sort of frightened that I would be chased off the planet. But they loved the idea. They said, Shimon, that is exactly what our life experience has been. Let's do it. So we did it. So it's a very short film, single channel film, 7 or 8 minutes long. It kind of cycles through 7 different tableaux. And with each passing tableau, there's one person less. And we don't know what happened because we never see anybody leave the table. Did they win? Did they lose? Etc. Until there's, now it's going to get a little loud for 1 second. I don't want to startle you. So let me, hold on a second. Oh, come on, Shimon. And we still have all 7 participants at the table. I filmed them with absolute poker faces. And I do that for a variety of different reasons. One related to the nature of trauma, going into automatic pilot when you're fleeing for your life, issues related to opacity and the right to keep your interiority and not be revealed. That's a bit of a longer conversation, but let me just scroll through this. So now we're down to 6 people. We don't know what happened. She plays the number 15. The camera sustains there longer than one would expect. We don't know why. But in fact, I had asked them during the production, well, what would be a good number to play now? And they said 15, and I said, why? And they said, because the Syrian revolution began on April 15th, 2011. So for them, it had significance. And as the piece, so now we have 5 people left. The only movement is the camera, them when they play their hands, and the ball, and the roulette ball, and the wheel. But there's no slow motion effects. We just train them to move slowly. Again, this sense of it being a bit like automaton-like. 3 people left. Okay, so now what? Two people left. And I'll just let it play to the end. Last man standing or sitting. For the millions of individuals fleeing the wars in Syria and elsewhere, individuals who've gambled their futures by making the dangerous journey to Europe in hopes of finding new lives, 7 of these individuals appear in this piece. And sometimes, depending on the venue, I show it as just a straightforward single-channel film projected on the wall. Sometimes I kind of expand it into being an immersive installation if there's a lot of space and resources, and this involves where elements of the film bleed into the space, and that involves having video projectors on the ceiling. So you're kind of in the piece rather than looking in the piece. Now we're getting closer to home. Night Watch, which premiered in New York City a couple of years ago during UN General Assembly Week and was just remounted and represented in San Francisco Bay this past weekend. The last night of the project was last night. Um, Let me just show you. I'm going to show you. Come on. Here we go. How many of you saw it? Ah, okay. Some. Okay, so for those of you who did see it, thank you for indulging this redundancy. Floating media installations that traveled in the waterways around New York. Night watch displayed silent, close-up video portraits. I can't read fast enough, sorry. I'm sure you can read it faster than mine. So these were silent video portraits of 12 new Americans, individuals whose lives were saved in recent time by being granted political asylum by the U.S. government, even during the time of Trump, or in spite of the time of Trump. So it's not like a generic project about immigration or immigrants. It's really about, it's much more intense. It's direct matters of life and death. And each of the individuals in the piece have horrific stories. They might look young and beautiful, but they survived torture. They survived mob violence, mob attacks, fleeing for their lives. And they live in the U.S. You know, and one of the things that's kind of very amazing for me in working with traumatized communities is witnessing resilience. And being young helps, of course, sometimes. But I have been very moved by, I mean, many people, you know, their parents were murdered, just horrific things. And this is just a couple minutes, just this little excerpt from the film itself that's displayed on the barge, both in San Francisco Bay and in New York. It opens with that James Baldwin quote, "We contain the other hopelessly and forever." And they approach the camera from a distance. Again, fairly blank expressions. I don't want to give away the emotional goods. I want to interrupt our expectations, our projections of what it means to be, in this case, an asylee. This is a gay Jewish man from Russia who was granted political asylum by the U.S. government. I think there were actually 2 Jewish people of the 12. God, that's something our father would do, right? Like who cares? Okay. This is a woman. This was an unaccompanied minor at the border. She was apprehended by the border police and she was not with her parents. And they just look at the shoreline. They're looking at the viewers. We're looking at them. They're looking at us. We're looking at them. They're looking at us. Kind of on an even footing, at least in the artistic imaginary. That was my intention. And then the film closes with, "For the millions who've been forced to flee their homelands to escape violence and discrimination." That was just 2 people out of 11 or 12. "For the fortunate few who have been granted political asylum in the U.S., 12 of these individuals appear in this piece." And news flash from San Francisco. News flash from this weekend. And none of that would have been impossible without this woman, Catherine Clark, and I. And again, I'm sort of a bit like a broken record. I often make photographs of my installations, which I do not intend them as documentation. I actually intend them to be to stand on their own, to underline certain relationships that the human eye might not normally do on site, like, for example, between this LED display of this survivor from Nigeria and the Freedom Tower, or this trans woman from Peru with the Statue of Liberty. Brooklyn Bridge. I think that's the Brooklyn Bridge, yes. There's Max, the fellow from Russia, with the Statue of Liberty at nighttime. East River, Lower Manhattan. And, this I'm not going to show. We don't have time for that. What I would like, in the last couple of minutes that I have, is to give you a little sneak preview of a piece that is premiering. Its worldwide premiere is at the Gallery in San Francisco. The piece is called Time-Lapse Dance. I have to just give, this is the last thing I'm showing you, and then we will open up for conversation and questions and answers. So I got an invitation to go to Brazil. I had never been to Brazil. I had always wanted to go. It was an invitation from an art foundation to make a new piece. And I had some lead time, so I was thinking about it. You know, I had maybe 6 months lead time, so I was researching and I was considering, and it was during the Donald Trump and Jair Bolsonaro and Orban and Erdogan, and the list goes on and on throughout the world in terms of the moment of this moment of, how can we say it diplomatically, transnational nativism might be a gentle description. So I was thinking about all these things, and then the part of Brazil I was going to, Bahia, it's called Bahia, it's a state, is dance and martial arts are a central form of cultural expression in Bahia. So I was thinking about that. And then for some unknown reason, don't ask me why, artists can have crazy little intuitions, I went back to this.
See Hitler on ice!
So it's a 17-second clip from history.
See Hitler
sorry.
on.
No. Once is enough. Once is enough. It's a 17-second clip from History of the World Part 1. Then I slowed it down to study the movements more closely. That reminded me of an Afro ballet or Afro Brazilian twirl. That's very much like a reverse capoeira kick. Okay. So I studied the movements, and they reminded me of different Brazilian dance and movement forms. The first, let me go back here. In case you didn't hear me, Marcia's telling me that I was too far from the mic. So this is very much like an Afro ballet twirl. Afro ballet is a very big dance form in Bahia. Reverse capoeira, the martial arts, a reverse capoeira kick. So I was these things were going through my mind. And I came up with this idea of, well, what if I were to film Brazilian dancers and martial artists responding to this Mel Brooks clip? So they had about a month to practice. We hired a choreographer who worked with me and worked with them. And their remit was not I didn't tell them to copy the ice skater. I said, just synchronize your movements, but within your own dance form. So when he does a twirl, you do a twirl. When he goes to that part of the stage, you go to that part of the stage. So you kind of shadow him, but within your own dance form. And the result is this 3-channel video installation that is being displayed in a very glorious manner at the gallery. This is just a dumbed-down viewing copy. Let's just see what I'm going to show you here. I'm just going to show a little snippet. Sorry, I could have scrolled through that. Excuse me. Scrubbed through that. So it's life size. I mean, each channel is about 8 feet tall by 15 feet wide. So it's a full immersion experience. Now, why do we not hear? Okay. So she's projected 8 feet, this is 8 feet by 15 feet, and now it's 8 feet by 45 feet. You're just seeing this really reduced viewing copy. She's doing what's called Bahian contemporary dance. They have a contemporary company there. And he's doing Afro ballet. And it seems innocent enough until other things start to happen slowly. So as the piece goes on, the Mel Brooks footage starts to come into the piece briefly, like little peekaboos. I was very fortunate to be able to work with some of the very best dancers in that part of Brazil. I'm just going to scrub through because I don't like going over my allotted time. Here's another interference from the Mel Brooks, if you caught that. And you're going to just have to go to the gallery if you want to see the full piece. That's a capoeirista, a martial artist. Very different kind of register, poetic register. Let's just sort of go about it. And then let's just go towards the end. Here we go. it's kind of like a false ending, but then there's a coda that appears. And with that, I want to thank you very much for your attention. And we are going to discontinue the streaming, I understand, and pivot to a little bit of Q&A. And I don't know is there someone? Yes, I guess it's just me and you.